Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. The first recorded transmission came in at 3:07 a.m. It was faint, buried beneath the hum of the universe, a rhythmic pulse so subtle it almost went unnoticed. The kind of signal mistaken for background radiation, the kind SETI filters out every day. But this one was different. It repeated. 3 pulses, a pause. 5 pulses, a pause. Then a sequence of numbers that should have meant nothing, except they formed a pattern no natural phenomenon could produce. For 12 minutes it continued. A structured cadence, deliberate, intentional. And then, as if whoever, or whatever, was transmitting had finally been acknowledged, the signal changed. The tones stretched, shifting into something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. A voice. Not static, not distortion, a voice buried in the noise. A whisper, barely audible beneath the hiss of the transmission, breaking through in brief, fragmented moments. It spoke in a language no one recognized. At first. Then, at exactly 3:19 a.m., the interference ceased. The frequency sharpened. And the voice, now clear, distinct, undeniable, spoke in perfect English. If you're hearing this, it means they failed to stop it. Turn off your receiver. Do not listen to the signal. No matter what happens, do not respond. Then, silence. Not the usual silence of an inactive channel. Not the white noise hum of a dish scanning empty space. A void. A complete absence of sound, as though the signal had never existed in the first place. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing came through. And then, every SETI array, every receiver tracking the anomaly, shut down simultaneously. No warnings. No error messages. Just an abrupt cut to black. Records of the transmission were erased from SETI's database in real time. Terminals that had logged the event were wiped, entire hard drives rendered blank. Operators at observatories across the world reported the same sudden blackout. No system failures. No external breaches. Just an absence. The only proof it had ever happened was a single emergency broadcast, intercepted from a private satellite monitoring the transmission. A recording recovered moments before everything went dark. A voice log. From a man who should not have existed. A voice whispering one final sentence before the system cut him off. They heard us. And now, they are listening. The moment SETI went dark, the world barely noticed. For the researchers inside, for those monitoring the vast, endless frequencies of space, it was different. It was immediate. It was absolute. Every receiver, every dish scanning the void, offline. Not a malfunction. Not a power failure. A deliberate, simultaneous shutdown across multiple global observatories. No alerts. No system diagnostic. No attempts to reconnect. One moment, they were listening. The next, they weren't. Dr. Callum Reyes saw the reports before they were wiped. Arecibo. Green Bank. Allen Telescope Array. Jodrell Bank. All of them gone, disconnected. No official statement. No classified leak. Just silence. The kind of silence that only means one thing. Someone doesn't want you to know what happened. And yet, despite every effort to erase the event, something remained. A single file. It was recovered from an old SETI data relay, buried in a temporary buffer, unnoticed by the sweep. A recording. A moment in time that shouldn't exist. A voice log that survived the blackout. A timestamp. 3:07 a.m. That's when it came through. The transmission. It wasn't supposed to happen. The system had been locked down, restricted from receiving external data. And yet, in the quiet hum of early morning, beneath the usual scans of pulsars and fast radio bursts, the signal forced its way in. Not noise. Not static. Something else. And someone, Marla Carter, a technician on the night shift, was listening when it arrived. She wasn't a scientist. She wasn't an expert. She was a second-year intern running frequency calibrations, The kind of work that required nothing but patience and a steady hand. The kind of work no one paid attention to. She noticed it immediately. An anomaly buried in the noise. A pulse, structured, rhythmic. 3 beats. A pause. 5 beats. A pause. A sequence continuing beyond the standard algorithmic filters. Not random. Not interference. Something was there. Marla ran a secondary scan. The anomaly persisted. The more she isolated the pattern, the clearer it became. A structured transmission embedded within the background radiation of deep space. Then the shift. At 3:11 a.m., the pulse stopped. At 3:12 a.m., a new modulation replaced it. At 3:14 a.m., the anomaly was no longer an anomaly. It was a voice. Not machine-generated. Not synthesized. Human. A whisper, broken by distortion. A language unknown, the syllables stretched, fragmented, just beyond recognition. The kind of sound that sends an instinctive shiver down the spine. She recorded it, analyzed the waveform, tried to extract meaning where none should exist. And then she saw the pattern. A sequence of prime numbers, encoded within the frequency shift. A universal constant, the fundamental language of intelligence. A deliberate message, one designed to be recognized. She called for Dr. Reyes. In the darkness of the control room, amidst the glow of monitors, he listened. He heard what she heard. His breath caught in his throat. His mind raced through years of failed searches, empty signals, hoaxes, interference. This was none of those things. This was real. He ran the audio through every known language database. No match. Then he slowed it down. Isolated the lower frequencies. That's when the whisper became clear. The words formed in fragmented gasps, like someone speaking through a wall of static. They know. They know we are listening. His hands tightened around the console. Then, a second voice. Not a whisper. Not distant. This one was different. This one spoke in perfect clarity. We were never meant to hear this. The signal cut off. The screens flickered. And then, SETI went silent. Marla didn't hesitate. She knew what she had heard, knew it wasn't normal, knew it didn't belong. There were protocols in place for events like this, unusual signals, anomalies that couldn't be explained. A network, private and classified, where SETI scientists could report and analyze without outside interference. She pulled up the secured line, her fingers moving fast over the keyboard. Priority alert. Immediate review required. She attached the waveform data, the compressed audio file, the prime number sequence, and sent it through the encrypted relay. For exactly 34 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the network collapsed. Every connection severed. Every secure line terminated. Marla blinked at the screen. Connection failed. Retry? She refreshed. Nothing. She tried again. Invalid credentials. Her inbox emptied itself in real time. Emails erased. Drafts gone. The entire SETI data network, which held decades of research, signals, archives, was vanishing before her eyes. She turned to Callum, her voice low, uncertain. Something's wrong. He didn't respond. He was already watching the status board, watching as one after another, every active radio telescope tracking the signal shut down. Arecibo. Offline. Green Bank. Offline. Jodrell Bank. Allen Telescope Array. NASA's Deep Space Network. Offline. Dishes that had been scanning the same coordinates for decades, gone in seconds. He grabbed his phone. Dialed SETI headquarters. A hollow, mechanical voice answered. The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. He tried again. Same response. He dialed a direct line. Dr. Greaves, a former colleague, one of the few he trusted. The call didn't even connect. He checked the main communication server. It was still running, or at least, it should have been. But every outbound message failed. Every internal log wiped. It wasn't just that SETI had gone dark. It had been erased. Callum felt it then. That creeping, suffocating weight pressing against his chest. This wasn't a systems failure. It wasn't a cyber attack. It was deliberate. Someone, somewhere, had just made the decision. SETI was no longer listening. And no one, not him, not Marla, not anyone, was supposed to know why. Callum had spent decades chasing signals. He knew how they worked, how they traveled, how they decayed, how they left behind fingerprints in the electromagnetic spectrum. But this was different. With every observatory shut down, every official line severed, there was only one place left to go. The offline backup. A system not connected to any network. A failsafe designed for corrupted data recovery. It was never meant to be used. Not like this. The raw transmission still existed in the local archive, untouched, unaffected. And now it was the only copy left. Callum launched the spectral analysis. The origin had to be determined. Where had the signal come from? A standard triangulation should have taken hours, but the system worked fast. It locked onto a source within minutes. Coordinates loaded. A set of numbers. A name. HD209458b. Callum stared at the screen. A gas giant. Uninhabitable. 1,600 light-years away. That didn't make sense. A planet like that, a massive, scorching wasteland with no solid surface, couldn't sustain life, let alone transmit a structured signal. Yet there it was. The data confirmed it. The signal's point of origin traced directly to the exoplanet. But then, he noticed something. The time delay. The way the waveform had degraded in transit. Light travels at a constant speed. So do radio waves. A signal sent from 1,600 light-years away should have arrived here centuries after it was transmitted. But this one was recent. Too recent. If the numbers were correct, if the decay rate was accurate, this signal had arrived almost instantaneously. As if it hadn't traveled from 1,600 light-years away. As if it had been sent from somewhere much closer. Too close. Callum ran the calculations again. Checked for interference. The numbers didn't change. The conclusion was impossible. The transmission had been masked, deliberately rerouted to appear as though it came from HD209458b. But the actual source, the real point of origin, was somewhere within our own solar system. Somewhere nearby. The transmission wasn't alien. It was here. And then, he heard it again. The whisper buried in the recording. Callum isolated the lower frequencies, stretched the waveform, ran it through a stabilization filter. The voice came through. Not alien. Human. Not distant. Close. Clear. Unmistakable. They are already here. The words hit him like a cold, crushing weight. The signal wasn't a message from across the cosmos. It wasn't reaching out. It was warning us. A sharp click broke the silence. The facility went into lockdown. The doors sealed. Every screen flashed red. A silent alarm. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just the sudden, absolute knowledge that something had been triggered. Something watching, listening, waiting. And now, it knew that they knew. The lockdown wasn't a system glitch. It wasn't a false alarm. It was deliberate. Callum's breath was steady, controlled, but his pulse hammered against his ribs like a warning drum. He knew what this meant. He'd worked for government-funded projects long enough to recognize the weight of an order that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Containment. There were no announcements over the intercom. No security teams rushing in with hurried explanations. Just the quiet hum of the facility's mainframe shutting itself down, the red warning lights pulsing in slow, methodical flashes. Everything electronic was being locked, wiped, rewritten in real time. He had minutes, maybe less. Marla tried to access the control panel, but the terminal had been overridden. No commands accepted. No manual overrides. The security feeds flickered once before they cut out completely. But not before he saw them. The first black SUV appeared on the outer perimeter. Then another. Then 3 more. Unmarked. No plates. No insignia. Helicopters followed, dark silhouettes against the overcast sky. No running lights, no official markings. The kind of aircraft that didn't show up on any record. The kind you didn't see unless you were about to disappear. Callum grabbed the portable drive. The only copy. The last surviving proof that the transmission had ever existed. The front gates to the facility didn't open. They didn't need to. The vehicles pushed straight through, tires grinding over concrete as men in dark tactical gear stepped out in precise formation. Not military. Not police. No hesitation. No announcements. They walked with purpose. Not to ask questions, not to investigate. To take. To erase. To remove. Marla turned to Callum, but before she could say anything, the doors to the main hall burst open. They moved fast. Too fast. In seconds, the first team had control of the security room. The data servers seized. The hard drives pulled. They weren't shutting down the facility. They were erasing it. Callum didn't wait. He slipped past the main corridor, his steps precise, controlled. He didn't run. Running attracted attention. Running got you caught. He reached the side maintenance exit, the kind of door nobody thought about because nobody ever used it. He pressed against the cold steel. It didn't budge. Override lock engaged. He exhaled, eyes moving across the keypad, searching for the manual latch. Then he heard it, Marla's voice. Raised. Cut off. They had her. A second later, her security badge was scanned. Access granted. They were coming through. Callum didn't think. He reacted. He moved to the utility hatch on the floor, an emergency crawlspace designed for technicians in case of a power failure. He dropped down. The hatch sealed above him. Boots hit the floor. They had entered the hall. He didn't stop. Didn't breathe until he was out. The tunnel was tight, metallic, stretching under the facility. Every vent, every pipe, every step felt like it carried too much weight, like any wrong movement would make just enough noise. By the time he surfaced, he was beyond the first checkpoint. Beyond the surveillance range of the main complex. The helicopters were still there. The SUVs were still arriving. This wasn't an operation. It was a shutdown. Everything and everyone inside was being neutralized. He turned away, gripping the drive in his palm, forcing his breath to steady. There was only one person left to call. Someone who had walked away from all of this years ago. Someone who never answered official calls. But this wasn't official. This was something else. He found a payphone. The kind nobody used anymore. The kind that didn't log numbers. He dialed. The ring was slow. A stretch of silence between each pulse. Then a click. A pause. A voice. Callum? It had been years since they last spoke. It's happening, Callum said. No preamble. No explanation. Greaves exhaled, long and steady. Tell me you didn't send this over the network. I didn't. But it doesn't matter. They knew the moment we heard it. A quiet static hummed on the other end of the line. Then, a single question. Do you still have it? Callum's grip tightened around the drive. Yes. Another pause. Then, don't play it. Callum didn't answer. Greaves's voice came back, low, careful. Where are you? Somewhere I'm not supposed to be. How bad is it? A long, steady breath. Then, Callum, shut it down. Delete it. Now. Callum closed his eyes. Why? Greaves's voice was sharper now. Just listen to me. This is bigger than SETI. Bigger than you or me. You're carrying something you don't understand. If they find you with it, you won't get another chance. What did we find? A pause. Not hesitation. Something else. Then, a quiet, almost haunted reply. No, Callum. The real question is, who found us? Callum didn't sleep. He didn't stop moving. He knew the moment he did, it would be over. The drive was still in his pocket, still pressed against his palm like a lifeline, but the weight of it felt different now. He had thought, hoped, that the signal was something new. A discovery. A first contact. But it wasn't. It wasn't a message sent to us. It was a response. A reply to something we had sent long before anyone working at SETI had ever pointed a dish toward the stars. The realization was slow, stretching across his mind like the first cracks in an old foundation. 50 years ago. What had we sent? And who or what had been listening? He made it to Greaves's house by dawn. The old scientist barely looked at him before shutting the door behind them, locking it twice, pulling the blinds. There was no hesitation. No time for pleasantries. Callum handed him the drive. Greaves plugged it into an isolated system. No network access, no external connections. A machine that had never been online, never been part of anything that could be monitored. The file loaded. The waveform appeared. And the voice in the transmission, played through the speakers. They know. They know we are listening. Greaves sat there, still, unmoving, as the audio continued. We were never meant to hear this. Then the final words. They are already here. The room was completely silent when it ended. Greaves didn't move for a long time. Then he ran spectral analysis. The machine processed, filtered, reconstructed the audio from the distortions, tracing the origin of the voice. Callum expected an unknown identifier. Something that couldn't be classified. Something alien. That wasn't what they got. A name appeared on the screen. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Cross. Callum didn't recognize it. But Greaves did. He stood so suddenly the chair scraped against the floor. Callum had never seen him afraid before. Not once. Not like this. That's impossible, Greaves whispered. He pulled out an old file, thick with age, pages yellowed at the edges. A mission report. NASA. 1987. Ethan Cross had been an astronaut. A test pilot for an experimental deep space telemetry project. His ship launched into high Earth orbit on March 19, 1987. It was a routine mission. A simple test of long-range communication protocols. Except, he never came back. Telemetry data showed a malfunction. A sudden power surge. Then, nothing. No wreckage. No debris. No explanation. The official report listed it as a catastrophic failure. But now, decades later, here he was. His voice, buried in the signal, sent from a source that shouldn't exist. Greaves turned to Callum, his face pale, his voice tight. This transmission... He paused. It's not a message from something out there. He looked back at the screen. It's a message from something that never left. Callum knew what came next. He had seen it before, stories buried before they could spread, names erased before they could be spoken. But this was different. This wasn't just information that could be hidden. This wasn't a simple cover-up, a classified file locked in some underground archive. This was a voice that should not exist. A voice that had been pulled from the silence of space, from somewhere beyond the reach of understanding, from a man who had been declared lost decades ago. Ethan Cross was dead. And yet, he wasn't. Not completely. His words were here. Recorded. Trapped in a transmission that had traveled through the void, buried beneath static, hidden within the frequencies of a response that was never supposed to be heard. 50 years ago we sent something out. A test. A signal. A transmission fired into deep space, searching for confirmation that we were not alone. We weren't. But we had been wrong about what we were reaching for. The reply was never meant for us. And the message, the one that had found its way back, wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. Callum sat at the terminal, the drive still warm in his hand. This was the last copy. The only remaining proof. The moment he made his decision, there would be no going back. If he released it, if he uploaded the recording, exposed the truth, everything would change. There would be no more secrecy. No more speculation. The world would know. And what then? Panic? Fear? A desperate scramble to explain the unexplainable? Or something worse? He thought of SETI going dark. The facilities wiped clean. The men who arrived without insignia, without names, removing everything, erasing every trace of what had been found. They weren't just hiding the truth. They were following orders. Because someone, somewhere, already knew. And they had chosen silence. For a moment, Callum's fingers hovered over the keys. The cursor blinked. The encrypted server was waiting. If he pressed upload, the file would scatter across mirrored locations, split into fragments, backed up 100 times over. Unstoppable. Irretrievable. He would vanish the moment he did it. He had no illusions about that. They would come for him. That was inevitable. But it wouldn't matter. The world would hear the message, and they would know. His breath was steady. His pulse, not so much. He exhaled, and pressed the key. The file transferred. For the first time in history, the truth no longer belonged to the few who had tried to bury it. It belonged to everyone. The screen flickered. The server confirmed the upload. And then the static came. A low hum. A distortion creeping through the speakers. Not from the recording. From something else. For a moment, just before the signal cut out completely, a final voice broke through the noise. Not a whisper. Not cross. Something else. Something that had been listening. And now it had answered. The screen went black. And in the final moments, as the last transmission from Arecibo Observatory faded into silence, one line of text appeared. The last known transmission from Arecibo Observatory. August 17, 2029. Officially, it never happened. If you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.